Welcome, everyone, to the Think and Reform podcast. My name is Luke Saint. Thank you so much for tuning in, all you lads, dads, chads, and grads. Please head over to futureofchristendom.org, where you will see upcoming events. We have a Lancastrian Theonomy Symposium coming up in March. We had a very successful one last year, and you can find all that content on our website and on YouTube at our YouTube channel. And we have debates, and we have books, we have T-shirts. Head on over to futureofchristendom.org and check out what we have available for you over there. Today's episode, we're going to be taking a look at Right Response Ministries and a video they just put out a couple days ago called Natural Law Theonomy. And it's a discussion from these gentlemen about, things like non-legislative theonomy, immigration, and basically they cover a range of topics that's not, substantial range, but they kind of ask a lot of really great questions. I think some of their answers need to be addressed, and some of the reasoning needs to be examined. And when I get into things like this, I have to start with a couple of housekeeping things, especially when I'm dealing with videos about Christian nationalism. The first thing I have to say when I'm talking about Christian nationalism and immigration, and I've said this before in this podcast, I think you said it last podcast, but I probably have to say it again just so everybody knows. When I say immigrant, I'm talking about somebody who wants to come and live in the United States. I'm talking about someone from the Congo, all the way up to someone from Canada. From Canada to the Congo, that's who I mean. Someone who wants to come. It could be anybody. It's like I said before, it's like saying American. There's many different types of Americans, and these guys, they kind of want American to become, I don't know, can you become more monolithic? They want the term American to be monolithic, and they want nationhood to be defined not propositionally. And I guess what they mean by propositional nationhood is that you get to become a citizen, or you're part of a nation. You belong to a nation because you have a certain belief system, you have a faith system, maybe to them you say the right things or something like that. So when I say immigrant, that's what I mean. I mean somebody who wants to come and live here in the United States, right? That means a lot of vast swaths of different types of people. I don't mean any specific group. I just mean someone who wants to come live here in the United States. When the Christian nationalists usually use the term immigrant, what they mean is Muslim or Hindu. They don't mean Canadians. When they say send all the immigrants back, all of them, they're not really going to kick out Swedish immigrants. You know what I'm saying? Immigrants from England. Or Canada, they're not going to send back, immigrants from France, right? They're talking about Hindus and Muslims and brown people, really. That's what they mean. And so, when I talk about immigration, what happens is when the Christian nationalists listen, they hear the word immigrant and they immediately think Somali Muslim, right? To me, the term is neutral. Immigrant is a neutral term. To them, it's a negative term, right? They almost take it personally when you say the word immigrant. They're very anti-immigration. That's kind of their whole platform, and that's kind of like their main concern. They're not really concerned about us killing our own children. They're concerned with people who come over here who might kill you, right? It's a potential, right? You're going to see a big concern over the immigration issue from Christian nationalists because he'll talk about this in the video here, but the term woke right, the term woke right, you see it kind of being played out here in this video. What the woke left does is they'll use an existential threat, right? Whether it be Nazism or climate change. Just realizing now it used to be called global warming. It's not called that anymore. Climate change or Nazism. And they'll use that to kind of say, like, if we don't act now, like if we don't make drastic measures and, basically punish the innocent and the guilty, right? If we don't go scorched earth, basically, then we're going to lose the world, or we're going to lose America, or everyone's going to be a racist or whatever. And you'll see the woke right, if you will, if I could use that term, what they'll do is they'll do the same thing, except this time it's with immigration. That's their existential threat, right? If we don't act now, if we don't punish the innocent and the guilty together, then then we're going to be destroyed, right? There's this existential threat. They're right on the doorstep, and I see many Christian nationalists are like, we got to do something right now. I mean, we got to start dropping bombs. We got to start deporting everybody. We got to start rounding people up. We got to give the state more power, things like that. So you're going to see it's kind of like an indication you're dealing with the woke right when they're talking about this existential threat of if we don't do something about the immigrants right now, we're going to be destroyed. We can't worry about abortion, right? That's not an existential threat. We've been living comfortably with that for the last 60 years. We'll fix that later, right? Right now, we have to deal with the existential threat. It's kind of the same the way the left works with climate change. We're $32 trillion in debt. We'll fix that later. Right now, we just give us your tax money so that we can destroy you, and things like that. So, like I said before, when I use the term immigrant, it's a neutral term. I'm not limiting it to any sort of country. I'm not limiting it to a skin color. An immigrant is a placeholder for somebody who wants to come live here in the United States. For the Christian nationalists, when they hear the word immigrant, they think Somali Muslim or Hindu, right? Who wants to build a idiotic statue on American soil. So that's what they mean. But for this podcast, when I say immigrant, I just mean someone who wants to come live here, right? So I kind of have to do some deprogramming before the show starts here. So let's let Mr. Webben and friends talk, and we'll see what they have to say about their episode here called Natural Law Theonomy.
Today's episode, Natural Law Theonomy. For those of you who have been following Right Response Ministries for some time, you are no stranger to the fact that I have described myself as a general equity theonomist for a few years at this point. My reason for always trying to add the adjective general equity theonomist, what kind of theonomist, general equity, is because there is a brand, multiple brands of theonomy that go beyond where I'm willing to go, that I think become autistic, a bit insufferable, and actually leave open opportunity for positions that are simply not in accordance with nature and are not in accordance with, I think, the whole of Scripture in true Christian praxis.
So he's kind of playing his hand here, right? A little bit, just a little bit. He's playing his hand here, or he's showing his cards here, or he's showing his hand. Not in accord with nature. So what a theonomist does is a theonomist is more interested in what is in accordance with God's word, right? Nature is a distant second, a distant third, and we're more focused on what does God's word tell us to do, right? What's our responsibility from God's word? If we are responsible with what God has told us to do, then everything's going to be okay as far as our nation is concerned, right? But you just heard him there say that his first thing was what is in accordance with nature. Now, theonomists don't generally say that. Theonomists are not nature people. That's secondary. So most people kind of don't really view Joel Webben as a theonomist. He still kind of holds on to the term, and maybe it's because he's changed his position on a lot of things. I think the Webben from 5 years ago would be, I think, shocked to see the Webben of today. And that, of course, that doesn't make him wrong. I'm not saying that's why he's wrong. Far be it from that. Of course, everyone goes through big changes, and just because you go through big changes doesn't mean you're wrong. But the fact is, he has gone through big changes. I mean, I can't believe he's still using the term theonomist. I can't believe he's still using the term Baptist. He just seems to dunk on Baptists and theonomists all the time. It's strange to me. So, a theonomist, is not concerned with what is in accordance with nature as much as he's concerned with what is in accordance with God's word, right? Because we believe that, God has given to us everything that pertains to life and godliness. And so we believe all that we have. Like, for example, if Aristotle never existed, we would still have everything we need for godly and righteous living. If Aquinas never existed, we'd still have everything that we have for godly and righteous living found in the Word of God, right? Not to say that those people weren't influential. Of course they were influential. But if they never existed, any pagan philosopher or any pagan philosophy, if it never was articulated or if it never existed, the Word of God still gives us all that we need in regards to life and godliness. That's what a theonomist believes, right? Not to say those things are all wrong, right? But they're not foundational for life and godliness. There's only one document that's foundational for life and godliness. That's the Word of God. Man does not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God, right? So, the theonomist is not really looking to nature and squaring things with nature. He's squaring things with the Word of God, like a Berean, right? The rallying cry of the theonomist was probably to the law and to the testimony. If they be not of these, there's no dawn in them. People who are concerned with nature, they're not really going to say that. They're not going to say to the law and testimony. They might say, if nature demands that I go to the law and the testimony, then I will, right? But you'll see, how these guys kind of prioritize revelation and nature. Let's continue here.
But that said, I do believe theonomy, which means God's law, theos, God, nomos, law. This is a biblical position. And when we say general equity theonomy, what we're saying is that the Old Testament law, when it comes to the moral law of God, it's summarized most succinctly in the Decalogue, Exodus chapter 20, the Ten Commandments. And this is the summary of God's moral law. God's moral law is immutable, that is unchanged.
I maybe you've heard me say this before, but I this isn't a huge point, but I contend with that claim. Let me go to Matthew chapter 22 here. Okay, so when the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, they gathered together, and one of them said, a lawyer asked him a question to test him. Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law? And he said to him, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and all your mind. This is the greatest and first commandment. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments depend all the law and the prophets. I don't believe that the Ten Commandments are a summary of the law. Maybe you could say that they are a summary, but they're never, unless I'm not thinking of some sort of really obvious passage, they're never described as a summary. Now, you could make a case that since they were put into the Ark of the Covenant, right, that they are a summary, and I get it. But here it's very clear that I think a more accurate statement of the summary of the law is you shall love your neighbor, you shall love the Lord your God, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself, because he says, on these two commandments, on these two, just these two, not depend the Decalogue, but depend all the law and the prophets. So it's a minor point, but I do not believe that the Ten Commandments are a summary. I believe to summarize the law is not to put it into the Ten Commandments. And it's not a huge point. Someone says, here's why it's a summary. Okay, that's not a huge point, but I think it's pretty obvious from this passage here that if we're going to summarize the law, it's going to be love Lord your God and love your neighbor as yourself.
Changing, the same yesterday, today, and forever. These morals persist. And then we have ceremonial law in the Old Testament, things that were that were acutely tied to the animal priestly sacrificial system under Old Covenant Israel, Old Covenant Judaism. And so that's no longer applicable for today because Christ has fulfilled those things. We no longer make animal sacrifices because Christ is the final sacrifice. Behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. We no longer have high priest because Jesus is our high priest in the order of Melchizedek. He is a priest forevermore.
I've never heard the name pronounced like that, Melchizedek. Maybe that was a slip of the tongue or something, but that's actually the first time I heard of that. You know, I thought it was Melchizedek. He said Melchizedek. Probably a slip of the tongue there. Or maybe there's another way to do it, like Augustine and Augustine.
We no longer have all the hand-washing rituals that we once had under the Old Covenant because Christ in his shed blood has made us pure, has made us clean. But the moral law of God endures forever. The moral law of God from the Old Testament is summarized in the Ten Commandments. And then apart from moral law and ceremonial law, the last category would be civil codes, civil law. And these civil laws that are given to Israel, we believe the general equity, right? The general principle of moral principle undergirding each of these civil codes, that moral principle is immutable and endures forever, but the direct application of that principle may vary according to time and place. So
I think that's, just when you think about what he said there, the principle is more important than the direct application of the civil law. I think that's I think that deserves some thought. What's more important than applying it as it says is to look at the spirit of it. Forget about the letter. Just look at the spirit. What's God really trying to do, right? What's really being said here? People often go to the New Testament and 1 Corinthians 9, I think it is, and they say like, oh, look at this, you should not muzzle the ox while it treads out the grain, right? That means that, you should pay your pastor, if you will, to kind of summarize it badly there. But what I don't see is people actually going, and by the way, it's still wrong to muzzle an ox while it treads out the grain. I've never seen anyone who takes that passage and is like, oh yeah, the ox, yeah, we're allowed to muzzle oxen now. It's now okay to muzzle an ox while it treads out the grain. I still think it's immoral to muzzle an ox while it treads out the grain. I don't think that's a wild or crazy statement. I don't. I think that's a very faithful application to what the law says. And in that passage, Paul doesn't look at one law and say, see, look, I kind of developed the principle. He goes to several laws, and he makes his case from a theme in the scriptures, right? He goes to the priestly sacrifices. They were allowed to eat the sacrifices. He goes to another law. I forget which one it is. And he goes to he starts with muzzling the ox, but he doesn't use one law and then conclude his case on one law. He makes his argument over several laws, and he doesn't use a law. He takes a theme, a consistent theme throughout the scriptures, and he concludes, so the Lord meant that for those, or decreed that for those who preach the gospel shall get their living from the gospel, right? It wasn't just from that one law. But Paul's not saying, oh, by the way, it's okay now to muzzle the ox. You can do that now. I don't think it's okay to muzzle the ox. I still don't think it's okay to boil a goat in its mother's milk. You know what I'm saying? The hands of the witnesses shall be first against the accused, right? We don't go to the general moral principle and say, it's okay now, we're going to try and figure out what God really meant from this and just forget about the actual application, because that's a judicial law. Forget about the actual application of the witnesses, their hands being first against the accused. Forget about that. Let's just kind of like reduce it to just a principle. It is a principle, right? And I say this all the time. It's like my theme phrase on this show. This general equity theonomy is when you take God's law and you reduce it to principles, and then man's principles become law. That's what happens, and that's what Webb is going to argue for here.
For instance, in Israel, the most often used example is the parapet, a border around the roof. That's because in their culture, during the summer months when it was hot, they didn't have air conditioning, they would sleep on the roof, and someone could roll off and get hurt. Well, today, we don't sleep on the roof. Nobody is getting a fine or a ticket or some kind of legal penalty for not having a border along their roof. But we do have...
See, an interesting observation there that he made. No one's getting a fine or a ticket. Well, I mean, back in Israel, they didn't get a fine or a ticket either, right? If you didn't put a parapet around your fence or around your roof, you didn't get a fine or a ticket, right? There's no punishment if you don't put a parapet around your house. There's no punishment, right? They didn't have a building and code inspector. They didn't have people walking around saying, hey, I see you have a roof up there. Where's your fence? And if you don't do it, I get your house, right? Because that's what we have right now. So I think oftentimes the temptation for us is to kind of anachronistically take our statist system and put it back in scriptural times. And I'm not going to say that's exactly what he was doing there, but I suspect that was what would happen there. No one's getting a fine or a ticket for not putting a fence around their roof. Well, they also didn't get a fine or a ticket back then either, right? There was no building or code inspector. There's no punishment if you don't have a wall around your roof, a fence. The purpose of that law was to establish who's at fault if something bad happens. If it wasn't like God was saying that every time you make a roof, there has to be a wall around it, because some people, I'm sure, different technologies came in. It's the same we have right now. He made the observation, he's right, that, there's nothing wrong with building a roof that doesn't have a fence around it because we don't sleep up there.
Certain laws to protect and esteem the dignity of human life made in the image of God, such as seatbelts or speed limits on the...
There it is. That's right. There it is. And it always comes into play whenever we're talking about this kind of stuff. There's the speed limit thing. I wonder if he would say if it's speeding is a sin. I wonder if anyone's ever asked him that. He's got a lot of content out there. These guys have got a lot of content. I wonder if they ever actually came down and said, yes, when you do 66 and a 65, you are in sin and you need to repent. Or are they more of like the letter, like when you're being dangerous, and the problem is, danger is in the eye of the beholder.
Highway. And so we're looking at a civil code like parapets along the border of a roof given to Israel under the Old Covenant that made sense. That direct application of the sixth commandment, thou shalt not murder, stated in the positive sense, thou shalt esteem and protect human life. The sixth commandment stated in the positive sense to protect human life, a specific application of that, given the culture, the time and place of Israel, was a parapet along the roof. So we would look at that civil code. We'd say, what's the general equity, the timeless moral principle undergirding this civil code about a parapet, a border around the roof? We'd say it's to protect and esteem, sustain human life. We'd say we no longer sleep on the roof in our cultures today, so that's no longer a direct application, but the moral general equity still persists, and so we're going to apply that to motorized vehicles. All right?
And in so doing, you become like the Pharisees, right? I mean, you can't tell me that's not what they were doing. You can't say, no, they weren't doing that, right? They were creating a hedge around a hedge around a hedge so that you wouldn't break the law. And the Pharisees, they would tell you, we got your best interest in mind. But Jesus said, in vain do they worship me, teaching his doctrines, the commandments of men. And so when you take a principle and you expand it to create new law for everybody to follow, you have no choice but to follow it, and you put it on the level of God's law. God's law is not optional, right? It's not like maybe I will, maybe I won't, kind of a thing. You have a moral obligation to follow God's law, right? You can't just, say I'm not going to follow God's law. I don't believe in God. That doesn't work, right? God doesn't accept that as an excuse. God does not accept, I don't, Lord, I don't know your law. So, you can't, just like Herod, and John the Baptist. John the Baptist was telling Herod, it's not lawful for you to have your neighbor's wife. An excuse from Herod, that sounds something like, well, I don't believe in God. That's not legitimate. John the Baptist didn't care. You have a responsibility to follow God's law. And the accusation from Jesus to the Pharisees was, you've taken, instead of actually following the law, right? You've created all these other extra things around the law. And now you're teaching your own laws like they're the law of God. The nature of God's law is that it's not optional, right? And when you make a law that's not optional, that's the nature of law. It's not optional. That's what makes it a law. It's not an option. When you make a law, you've put it on the level of God's law, right? That's how you add or take away from God's law, is that you've taken a law that's not optional and you force it upon a people, right? The Bible does not recognize man's law as a source of morality or a source of authority. That's made clear in Romans 13. Romans 13 designates the magistrate as someone who punishes what is evil. Breaking man-made law is not evil. Okay? It's not. Not wearing your seatbelt while driving down the road is not evil. Okay? Doing 70 in a 55 is not evil. The Lord's not going to send a thunderbolt your way because you went over the speed limit. It's interesting that even our laws in this country don't even have a moral designation attached to them. They don't even say it's wrong to break these laws. They just say, if you break this law, we're going to do that. Or you're not allowed to do this. But there's no moral designation attached to it. They're not even saying it's wrong. Our man-made laws don't even say it's wrong to break them. They don't even say that. They don't say this is immoral to break this. They just, here's a bunch of laws, and if you don't follow them, we're going to punish you. Christians are the only ones who think it's wrong to break man-made laws. How we keep each other in line, I guess, with statist policies. But the nature of God's law is that it's not optional, and when you make a law that applies to everybody, you've added to God's law, right? We're not allowed to add or take away from God's law, and we'll get into that in a second. But what he's talking about here is general equity theonomy, where instead of actually following the law, you reduce it to a principle. It's not a law anymore. And then we take our principles and we institute them as law, thereby teaching as doctrines the commandments of men, which we're not supposed to do.
Right? That is general equity theonomy. General equity theonomy. And I'm perfectly comfortable still wearing that moniker. But in many ways, I think...
And I think that, let that be a lesson to all you people who are general equity theonomists. Let that be a lesson to you. Watch what he's about to say and say he's not being a consistent general equity theonomist. The conclusions he's about to reach. You can't tell me he's not being a consistent general equity theonomist. The term general equity, unfortunately, it's been abused to such a degree that all it really means is just find what you think is the wisdom and then make your own law. I'm sorry, that's what it means. And there's so many general equity theonomists out there that I get in arguments with who are telling me in my face, yes, speeding is sin. Sin is speeding and speeding is sin. That is ridiculous and asinine. I can't believe you can even look at yourself in the mirror and say something so stupid. But tell me he's not being a consistent general equity theonomist with the conclusions he draws from this episode.
I think that it could also be said, and perhaps even better said or described as natural law theonomy. And that's what I want to get into today, because the problem with some of the hardcore OG theonomists is that if there's not a chapter and verse, right, they get a little bit autistic when it comes to their theonomy. If there's not an explicit chapter.
Okay, now, I don't understand why you would use the term autistic. I always forget the passage here. That is Isaiah 8:20. To the teaching and to the testimony, if they speak not according to this word, is because they have no dawn. That's what people are like. That's what people are saying when they say, I need a chapter and verse. We're just rephrasing that verse right there. To the law and the testimony. If you be not of these, they're not of the dawn, right? Now, the confusion comes in when people say, well, do you need a chapter and verse to tie your shoe? The answer is no, I don't. But if God said, here's how you tie your shoe, and then you tell me, hey, you don't need to look at the law of God anymore to learn how to tie your shoe, I'd say, well, I'm going to go to the law and testimony, thank you very much. And I'm going to judge what you say with what the law and the testimony says. This is the problem the Christian nationalists have when people are like, I need chapter and verse on that. Because the Christian nationalists are trying to smuggle in tyranny, respectfully to them. I think they're trying to smuggle in tyranny, and they're getting frustrated that the Christians are holding them to a standard that's beyond their own reason. And they don't like that. As you can see here, I'll share a tweet from Isker here, who made this tweet a couple, I think it's, I'm not sure when it was, but he said, you shouldn't go out in public with spaghetti stains all over your shirt. And then the response is, quote, where does the Bible say that is a sin? And he says, and parenthetically, this is 70% of arguments about politics on here among evangelicals, right? The Christian nationalists are getting frustrated that the Christians are holding them to a Christian standard, which is the Bible. And they're saying things like, hold on a second, where did you get that idea from? Is that from the Bible? And the Christian nationalists are saying no, and it doesn't have to be, right? Stephen Wolf has a whole episode dedicated to him saying, I don't need to go to the Bible for everything that I'm saying. I can force upon another person, a way of life, and I don't need a Bible verse for it, right? Because we're talking about politics now. If you're talking about manners, if you're talking about mechanics, and you're talking about how to put a computer together, if you're talking about carpentry, I understand that, you don't need a chapter and verse, right? But when you're talking about, here's how you're going to live, and if you don't live this way, you're going to be put in prison, you're going to be killed, or you're going to be fined. Then I do need, yes, I need a chapter and verse on that one. Where did you get the authority to tell other people how to live? Where did you get that idea from? Don't tell me it's from Aquinas and his 4 categories of law. Don't even say that, because he's not authoritative, right? If I never knew about Aquinas, I still have enough for righteousness and justice, right? Proverbs 28:5. Wicked people do not understand justice, but the righteous understand it completely. We have a wicked people do not understand justice, but the righteous understand it completely. We have a full understanding of justice from the law of God. That's the claim there in Proverbs. We know what justice is. We know where it starts. We know we know its middle, and we know its ending, right? It has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and we know it because of the law of God. That's the claim from Proverbs, right? The wicked people do not understand justice, but the righteous understand it completely, right? So, since we have this complete understanding of justice, we go to the Word of God for this understanding of justice. And when people come along and say, I'm going to have this new take on justice. Let's have a Christian prince that's basically a dictator, and he can basically order society the way that he wants, as long as he says it's for your good. The Christian's going to go, well, that doesn't sound biblical to me. Where'd you get that idea from? I don't need to and the response is, I don't need to tell you where I got that from. We're just going to do that, right? And you're going to see that attitude coming out here in this podcast as he continues to talk. He's going to bear that frustration out. They're getting frustrated that people are starting to ask them for biblical justification of their views, and they don't realize they didn't get a lot of their views from the Bible. They got their views from, Junius, or they got their views from the Reformed tradition, or the Catholics, or Greco-Roman pagan philosophy.
Chapter and verse in the Bible, then they actually can become antinomian, that there is no law. And so I want to start by, instead of just fleshing out that principle, I think it could be even more helpful for clarity's sake to start by proving it from a case study. So I want to start today's episode with immigration. And so I'll open it up now. If we can pan out to the team, we've got Wesley Todd and Antonio Griffith joining me per usual. I want to hear from you guys, and then I'll give my answer. But what would the I'm a theonomist, hardcore OG theonomist today say about immigration?
Well, we know what some theonomists said. Gary North would be one of them. It's tough to remember if some other guys might have said this as explicitly, but they were very much so in favor of a more libertarian immigration policy.
Yes.
Now, generally what they would attach to that is say, immigration, generally speaking, should be something that's freely done. People are allowed to immigrate into a society, immigrate out of society, on the basis of being Christian. And so you'd have to look back at some of the things that Gary North had said, but he's pretty against an exclusivist, very protective immigration policy. There's other guys that have gone as far as saying, what matters for immigration is that they're Christian. And so what they do is you kind of take the natural categories that you would normally look at when it comes to immigration. That's what we have in our immigration policy right now. An H-1B visa, for example, is a skilled worker. We're looking at them and saying, well, okay, sure, you're this.
I wonder about this. I wonder about that. What you would normally do. Normally, I mean, as far as I know, the immigration policies we have now are pretty novel. I don't think there was like checkpoints, a couple hundred years ago, where people were like, "Let me check your documentation. The visa." The passport, these are all post-war consensus institutions. I'm not saying they were all invented after World War II, but you saw their implementation and their establishment skyrocket after World War II. The visa and the passport and the papers, please kind of silliness was basically a post-war consensus thing that just took off after World War II. So when he says that you would normally see, that you would normally do, I think he's talking about like from today, something from today. But historically speaking, what he's arguing for is not normal. It's quite novel.
This religion, you're that religion, you were born in this country. What we're interested in is you have a skill to give us. What theonomists did, and this was again more to the 80s and the 90s, this wouldn't have been Rushdoony. And it's important to understand that. Rushdoony, especially in the 70s and the 80s when he's writing, he was good. He was hardcore. He understood a lot of natural distinctions that have importance for the nations. But the later ones that came in, just like, and I would say this was the whole of American culture, so I don't want to uniquely blame theonomists. The later ones came in and they said, the only thing that matters is if someone's Christian. And if you kind of peel it back, you look at it and you say, this is propositional nationhood. What does a nation mean? What is it comprised of?
They have a big problem with propositional nationhood. I wonder I think it's harder for them to gatekeep propositional nationhood. And I think they're interested in gatekeeping what it means to be an American. And they don't like propositional nationhood, and they'll get into it why. What you're about to see here is an argument for central planning. And central planning is anti-biblical, right? God's law and the Bible nowhere gives the magistrate the authority, just like he doesn't give the pastor the authority or the father the authority to force people to do business in a certain way, regulate commerce from a centralized area, right? Immigration regulation is the regulation of commerce. It's regulation of thoroughfare. What I believe and where I'm coming from, and I guess I should have said this at the beginning, is, again, conservatives and Christian nationalists, when you use the term open borders, it doesn't mean, open borders does not mean open borders to them. Open borders means an invitation to chaos. That's what it means. So if you say we should have open borders, I'm not even sure if the liberals even, I wonder who even says we should have open borders. I wonder. There's probably people out there, but just thinking in recent memory, I've never heard anybody say that. But Maybe their liberals are saying something like that. Then I don't know. They have no idea what they're saying. But the term open borders, when you use it, or when they accuse you of believing in open borders, they're accusing you of believing in chaos and lay down and lick the boot of the immigrant, right? That's when someone says, "Oh, you believe in open borders." They're not just saying free immigration. What they're accusing you of is that you believe that Americans should just give all of our stuff to the foreigner, let him come and live, and we work for them, basically, let the foreigner rule over us. That's the accusation. That's what open borders means. It doesn't mean free immigration. I'm someone who believes in naturally regulated immigration. And what I mean by naturally regulated immigration is that I believe that God's law, as is, regulates immigration naturally, right? God's law accounts for the immigrant. God's law regulates the immigrant. Some examples would be, he who does not eat shall not work. Who does not work shall not eat, right? That regulates immigrants. Leave the sheaves. Don't collect all of your crops. Don't be stingy about your crops. Whatever's left behind, the immigrant and the sojourner, the widow and the orphan can partake of that. We saw Ruth was being regulated by that when she came to Israel. Other things like do not blaspheme, do not commit adultery, do not make for yourself any carved image, do not bow down to them. These are all laws that regulate immigrants, right? So I believe in something called natural regulation, where God's law naturally regulates immigrants through its own laws, right? These guys are arguing for something I call unnatural regulation, where it's regulation through central planning. We have a small group of people who can't possibly know or have any sort of bead on what's going on in the country, making decisions for thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people, and punishing innocent people along with the guilty. And if I could summarize Christian nationalism, the attitude of Christian nationalism appears to be, as I said before, the scorched earth thing. The attitude seems to be, we need to teach as doctrines the commandments of men, and we must do evil that good may come. They'll tell you all the time. They'll tell you to your face. They say deport all immigrants, and if you ask them, the immigrants that haven't done anything wrong, they came over here, and they're not doing anything wrong, and they'll say, yeah, them too. And what Christian nationalism, unfortunately, is demanding of its adherents is that they punish the guilty along with the wicked. The thing about God's law is that it never demands that the innocent be punished with the guilty. Never. It never demands that, right? That's never a requirement that if you punish, if you punish the guilty, the innocent have to be punished as well, right? That's never a requirement in God's law, right? God's law only punishes guilty people. Now, there will be scenarios and instances where people who are trying to follow God's law will punish innocent people, right? That's going to happen, but God's law never institutionalizes the punishment of the innocent along with the punishment of the guilty. Do you understand? Now, God might do that with plagues and things like that, but his law never institutes that. And what these guys are arguing for through central planning is to institute a system where the innocent are punished along with the guilty. And that seems to be a requirement of Christian nationalism. Like, if you don't get on board with that, I wonder if you can call yourself a Christian nationalist.
It's people that believe in the American dream or the American spirit. Doesn't matter where they're from or how they were raised or the religion they are, the language they speak. They believe in America. So theonomies did that, except the proposition, the creed was Christianity, but the end result for both of those, whether it's believe in the American ideals or believe in Christianity, is that millions and millions and millions of people want to come to your nation, not work, not offer something to it, but come there for free stuff. And so that's why...
I don't understand this either. Why would you fault theonomists for wanting only Christians in the nation, and the people are coming over here because America instituted socialistic policies where we steal from the hard worker and we give to the lazy person? and you look at that like it's some sort of problem with the theonomists, I don't understand how you could make that connection. Well, here's the problem with the theonomists. They wanted only Christians to come over here. But then that problem is that the immigrants come over here and start stealing our stuff, and they take all of our money. Well, that's not the theonomists' fault. That's the statists' fault. They implemented those. Theonomists want to get rid of those institutions that give free money away. So how could you possibly fault the theonomists for wanting only Christians to come over here, or at least you said Gary North and Rushdoony, and that being the litmus test, which I personally don't agree with, but being faithful to their arguments. How could you conclude that the problem with that is that people are going to come over and take our stuff that our own government is forcing us to give without our consent? What does that have to do with theonomy? To me, it's a strange connection.
Some of the later theonomists, it's important to distinguish a more broader sense, general equity, than even, for example, non-legislative theonomists. There are a brand of theonomists that don't
Shout out.
think there should be a state that should legislate at all. It should just be these things, and people abide by it, and that's it. And that's where we distinguish and say, no, we're not that. We believe.
Right. So that's not just a random belief. I mean, again, I'm sorry, I repeat myself so many times on this podcast, but the Christian nationalists just keep on running away from debates. You ask them to debate, and they say, "Yeah, I'm busy," or no, I don't want to. No, they beat their chest in the comments section. And then you invite them on to talk about it, and suddenly they head for the hills. Look, the wicked flee when none pursue. But anyway, the passage that we're talking about here. So this is not just a random belief, like that we're just suddenly coming out of nowhere. Deuteronomy 4:2, you shall not add to the word that I command you, nor take from it, that you may keep the commandments of the Lord your God that I command you. Right? And I ask this question all the time. What's the general equity principle of that? What's the general equity principle? Don't say it means don't add to the moral law of God. Right? That's true, we can't. But he didn't just give moral laws here. In this address in Deuteronomy, he gives moral, civil, and some ceremonial laws. So don't just say that this is just for the moral law, because that's not the context. The context is any of God's laws. Don't add to any of them or take away from them. Again, almost right in the middle of the book. Everything that I command you, you shall be careful to do. You shall not add to it or take from it. You're not allowed to avoid any of them, including. Are you allowed to avoid this? Are you allowed to avoid this commandment right here? This commandment: everything I command you, shall be careful to do. You shall not add to it or take from it. Take from it. You're not allowed to take it away. And here's Christian nationalists and a lot of other people saying, "Yeah, let's take that one away. Forget about that one." We have planes, trains, and automobiles now. This no longer applies. So it's really a desire to be faithful to Christ and His Word that we say to create a legislature is to immediately start teaching His doctrines, the commandments of men, something we're not supposed to do. And the law, or the psalmist, time and again tells us, it's enough. God's law is enough for righteous living. It's enough. And if you're following the two greatest commandments, upon which depend the law and the prophets, if you're following these two laws, you don't need to be governed any further. So why would you need a legislature? If you're following God's law, right, and you're being faithful as a nation to God's law, not saying everything's perfect. I'm not saying you have utopia. That's never going to happen. No one's saying that. But if you come along and say, if you find someone as a magistrate and you say, okay, this person's loving the Lord, right, and he's loving his neighbor as himself, I don't need to interfere. I don't need to interfere with somebody who... I don't need to interfere with somebody who's loving the Lord and loving his neighbor as himself. No reason to do that. The Christian nationalists maintain this point that even though you're loving the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and you're loving your neighbor as yourself, you're still not loving the state, are you? This you lack. You're not loving the state because you're not following my laws, right? You're not following my central planning and my grand vision for the nation. You're not following my institution of order. So you still lack that. So you could be loving the Lord and you could be loving your neighbors yourself, but the Christian nationalists say, but you still lack this one thing over here, right? You let an immigrant in, right? Or, you didn't vet that immigrant or what have you, right? So the attitude of non-legislative theonomy is you can't punish somebody who's not doing anything wrong. The state shouldn't be punishing people who aren't doing anything wrong. And if you're loving the Lord your God and you're loving your neighbors yourself, aka following the law of God as is, then you don't need to be governed. But the Christian nationalists are like, actually, yes, beyond that, you still need to be governed. That's the belief that they have.
Believe in natural categories, and we wouldn't just open immigration up to anyone who says, I claim to be a Christian.
Right. So to steelman the argument from the hardcore, OG theonomists as it pertains to immigration, this is, there would be multiple criteria that they would insist need to be met. So one would be Christian. You're absolutely right. In addition to that, they would say, well, the welfare state is not biblical, which I would agree with.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Good. I'm glad you mentioned that.
If you don't work, you shall not eat. And so they would cite that chapter and verse.
Yep.
So they would say, well, people can't immigrate here and get a free check.
Notice he's not saying we would say, right? Because he's not an OG hardcore theonomist. He's just a God's laws of principle thing.
There's no such thing as a free lunch. And so they can't get a handout. So the criteria would be, one, they need to be Christian, but we don't have regeneration goggles. That's, part of the problem. So it would just, man looks at the outward appearance, God alone sees the heart. So anyone in the world, 1 billion, people in India tomorrow could say, well, we've converted. We're no longer Hindus, and we affirm the Apostles' Creed. The theonomists would say, okay, well, wait a second, but you can't come here and get a free check. So you don't get a handout. You have to come here and work. Okay, those 1 billion Indians would then respond and say, sounds good to me. H-1B visa, and
when do I get my flight?
Yep, and we'll take a job. So we will work. We abandoned Hinduism, and we're now, as of 15 minutes ago, affirming the Apostles' Creed. So we're Christian now. We are willing to take Americans' jobs. So we're willing to work, put you out of work, but we'll work, and we're also willing to go through the legal process. Some of the theonomists that I've talked to say, okay, well, there would still be a process. There's still, there's a border, but there's a gate, and you have to go through the gate. You can't climb over the fence, right? So you have to, enter through the official means. Okay, so play it out, all right? Say that America says we're only going to take Christian immigrants, those who profess Christ, because that's all we can measure. We don't have, election goggles. All we can measure is someone's profession. So all of a sudden, you have, 8 billion people in the world, and they all want to live in America. So they all decide on a dime they're going to profess that Jesus is Lord. And we say, well, wait a second. Don't be too hasty. No free ride. No free money. You have to get a job. And they say, okay, yeah, we'll take Americans' jobs. Okay, well, also you have to go through our process. And every theonomist I've talked to would say the process would need to be fair, equitable, and clear. But here's the catch. I've asked virtually every theonomist that I know, is there any mitigating mechanism beyond that? Can a nation, a Christian,
AKA, is there central planning?
Nation, America, for instance, can we say, even if you're Christian, even if you're not taking welfare, you're willing to work, and you come through our process and sign whatever documents are necessary, we will still only take this many people. And every theonomist I've talked to says, well, that part right there is arbitrary. I don't have a chapter and verse for that.
Right.
That's not theonomy. So no. So it's limitless. It is limitless. And here's the thing. They'll all say, but if we were doing everything righteously, we abolished the welfare system. We weren't giving them a free check. So they had to work and they had to do it legally, and nobody's coming in illegally. They just, don't worry. These are legal Haitians. Legal Somalians.
Hey, good news.
Yeah, exactly. These are Christian. They're eating my cat and dog. Don't worry, these are Christian Haitians.
Again, you're still importing into this scenario. The theonomists, creating an immigration system that's regulated by God's law, not by man's law. A natural immigration system, or being faithful to God in immigration, is not going to solve your problems. If this nation was faithful to God in its immigration policy, but it was unfaithful in its government, in its system, in its laws, that's not going to solve anything. The curse from God Deuteronomy 29. What am I doing with Deuteronomy 30? No, is it 27? Where am I going here? Oh, yes. Okay, I'm getting confused with the curses. Oh, here it is. Curse for disobedience, right? In Deuteronomy chapter 28 here. Let me just read the passage I'm looking for here. Okay, he's going to bring against you the sicknesses of Egypt. Bring you back to Egypt. Or make you a byword. Verse 43, the sojourner who is among you shall rise higher and higher above you, and you shall come down lower and lower. He shall lend to you, and you shall not lend to him. He shall be the head, and you shall be the tail. Now, my question for the Christian nationalists is, do you think an immigration policy is going to fix that problem? The sojourner who is among you shall rise higher and higher above you. You shall come down lower and lower. That's what's happening. That's what the Christian nationalists are trying to stop. They're trying to stop that. Bless their hearts. They're trying to stop that, right? They see it as a problem. It's a problem, right? They see what's happening in Europe. They're scared, and they're like, we got to stop this before this comes to our nation. This is a problem. They're absolutely right. It is a problem. Their solution is going to make things worse. The sojourner who is among you shall rise higher and higher above you. You shall come down lower and lower. That's what's happening in England, right? They're afraid it's going to happen here, and it's already, the process has already begun. He shall lend to you, and you shall not lend to him. He shall be the head, and you shall be the tail. Why is this curse coming around? Why do we have this curse? Is it because we didn't have a good immigration policy? Is it because we didn't have good central planning? Because we weren't central planning right? Do you think a good immigration policy is going to stop the curse of God? Do you think central planning is going to somehow get in the way of God's curse? You think you can stop God's curse through central planning? And I'm getting the impression that if we get the right immigration policy here, we can stop the sojourner from ruling above us. But time and again, this curse is bookended. If you will not obey the voice of the Lord your God, or be careful to do all his commandments and statutes that I command you to do today. If you don't follow God's law, if you're not faithful to him, you're going to be cursed. And the Christian nationalist position is, well, let's only be partly faithful. Let's not be wholly faithful. Let's be partly faithful in something, Sabbath laws and blasphemy laws. But other than that, let's keep all the departments. Let's keep all the statisms. Just have Christians doing it, right? And let's, punish the innocent along with the guilty. Let's turn aside the sojourner. And again, when I say sojourner, that just means someone who wants to come and live here, right? That's not wrong. It's not immoral, right? They're like, we can get around God's curse if we just centrally plan, right? And we have a quota or what have you, and we interview everyone, we vet everyone. We can get around God's curse. We can stop that. But time and again, the call of the theonomist is, faithfulness to Christ and His Word is the only thing that's going to stop this problem, this immigration problem. Faithfulness. That's the only thing that's going to stop it. Let's hear some more of what they're saying here.
So they memorize in broken English and can recite the Apostles' Creed. They don't get a free check. They just take your job instead.
See, that frustrates, or that makes me wonder a little bit. They take your job. That's a Marxist talking point. The Marxists say that. Capitalists don't say that. They're not afraid of cheap labor, right? They recognize that as a common staple of the marketplace, is that there's always cheap labor. And you can always go cheaper. Why would he be using a Marxist talking point to scare his listeners? Or not scare, that's a too strong a word, but to warn his listeners. Why would you be using a Marxist talking point? Here's a letter from Marx. London, April 1870. Written April 9th, 1870. And this was written to, I think it was written to Engels, I think, maybe. But let me read you some of Marx's problems here. But the English bourgeoisie has also much more important interests in the present economy of Ireland. Owing to the constantly increasing concentrations of leaseholds, Ireland constantly sends her own surplus to the English labor market and thus forces down wages and lowers the material and moral position of the English working class. And most important of all, every industrial and commercial center in England now possesses a working class divided into two hostile camps, English proletarians and Irish proletarians. The ordinary English worker hates the Irish worker as a competitor who lowers the standard of life. In relation to the Irish worker, he regards himself as a member of the ruling nation and consequently becomes a tool of the English aristocrats and capitalists against Ireland, thus strengthening their dominion over himself. He cherishes religious, social, and national prejudices against the Irish worker. His attitude towards him is much the same as that of the poor whites to the Negroes in the former slave states of the USA. The Irishman pays him back with interest in his own money. He sees in the English worker both the accomplice and the stupid tool of the English rulers in Ireland. This antagonism is artificially kept alive and intensified by the press, the pulpit, the comic papers, in short, by all the means at the disposal of the ruling classes. This antagonism is the secret of the impotence of the English working class despite its organization. It is the secret by which the capitalist class maintains its power, and the latter is quite aware of this. So he's bringing up a Marxist talking point here to warn people, they're going to take your job. I don't know. My question would be, well, if they're harder workers and are much more interested in doing a better job for less money, or just doing the job for less money, my question is, how could that be a bad thing? How's that a bad thing? I mean, have you ever been on a job site? Have you ever lifted up a power tool and subcontracted? You know what it's like to be in that position where you're frustrated that you just got underbid. And now you lost the job because someone else was going to do it cheaper. You realize that's part of the market. That's just the way things go. There's no desire to suddenly create a bunch of laws that says only I get all the business and I set the prices, right? This is a Marxist talking point. And I guess according to Christian nationalist rules, every time if they think you're taking a libertarian talking point, that makes your whole position libertarian. So I guess according to Christian nationalist rules, I guess I'm allowed to call these guys Marxists from now on because they have a Marxist talking point. Hey, I don't make the rules. That's their own rules. If they see you making a libertarian talking point, a conservative talking point, a normie talking point, a post-war consensus talking point, just one. You don't have to adopt the whole position, just one. Suddenly you get hit with, well, then you are that thing if you take one. This is a Marxist talking point. The Marxists are like, no one's allowed to come steal our jobs, blah, 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 blah. That's a fear that they conjured up. This is a Marxist talking point. So I guess I'm allowed to call them a Marxist from now on. I don't know. Hey, I don't make the rules.
And they fill out the paperwork or hire someone to do it for them to enter legally. Then the question that still stands for the theonomists, the OG hardcore theonomists, is, can we still say after that, if those three criteria are met, no, simply no, from logical, reason-based, natural law reasons? Can we simply say, I'm sorry, America is a population of 330 million people. About a third of that is already foreigners who have not assimilated, and we simply cannot take 1 billion people. The theonomists.
A billion people. Could this nation take up 1 billion people? Let me look up here. I forget what the passage. Here it is. Yeah, it is verse. It is verse 11. Okay. At that time I said to you, this is Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 11. Verse 9, sorry. At the time I said to you, I'm not able to bear you by myself. The Lord God has multiplied you, and behold, you are today as numerous as the stars of heaven. May the Lord, the God of your fathers, make you 1,000 times as many as you are and bless you as he promised you. So Moses was hoping that there would be 1 billion people, right? Because there's at least 1 million people there that he was talking to. And you could say, he was just being hyperbolic, right? It's okay. Webbin's being hyperbolic too. So if Moses is saying, I hope the Lord makes you 1,000 times more numerous than you are, that would be 1 billion people. He was hoping that 1 billion people would be in that little New Jersey-sized strip of Israel. So I don't see a problem with 1 billion people trying to come over here. If we hadn't instituted abortion, who knows how many people would be alive and well today? If we were a faithful Christian nation from 1950 up to today, and we had lots of babies, we celebrated the family, we were faithful to God after we came back from the war, and we didn't do abortion the way we've done it today, I think you could comfortably say there'd probably be somewhere in the ballpark of 1 billion people in this country by now. Because, obviously Christian families are big families. We celebrate children, like to have a lot of kids. We don't like abortion. And if Christian culture increased from the 40s to today, I think we'd be approaching 1 billion. Okay, 1.3 billion. You saw the nation of India and China. They're not that much bigger than the United States. And I'm not hoping that we become like them. But I am saying, America can comfortably fit 1 billion people in this country. There's no problem. There's absolutely no problem with 1 billion people. Does that mean that, I want, or anybody wants, all the Indians or the Chinese or the Africans coming over here? No, nobody wants that. You hope that they stay in their own country, right? And they, you don't want 1 billion people coming over here. But his scenario, when he says the phrase, play it out, right? Play it out. Now, I wouldn't mind a lot of people coming over here if we were biblically faithful, right? But since our human laws, since we decided, okay, God's law is not enough. We need a legislature. Let's make our own rules. Let's throw out God's rules and make our own. Since we decided that, what we've done is we've instituted laws that allow wicked people to thrive and righteous people to be on the ropes at all times in the eyes of the law. To do the right thing is illegal in this country. It's illegal, right? We're not allowed to do the right thing. We've legislated ourselves to death in such a way we're not allowed to fight back if we're being attacked by these same immigrants. We're not allowed to. It's illegal. It's illegal to do that. We will be sued if we try to do the right thing, if we try to protect our families, our communities, things like that, our dogs and cats. Since we've done that, we've instituted a nation that gives the immigrant the upper hand, right, in the eyes of the law. The righteous, not necessarily the immigrant, anyone who's being wicked, your fellow American. Our laws have instituted such a jurisprudence that the righteous are at a disadvantage in the courtroom. And that's thanks to man-made law. God's law always puts the righteous at an advantage in the eyes of the law. You always have the advantage. It's always legal to do the right thing. It's always good to do the right thing. It's always legal to do the right thing. Unfortunately, with our man-made system, we've now made it illegal to do the right thing. We're not allowed to, right? So I wouldn't want a whole bunch of people coming over here because I can't fight back. It's illegal for me to fight back if I start being oppressed. Or any of these people, weapon. It's illegal. They can't do anything. We're not allowed to do anything, right? Multiculturalism is instituted and celebrated, and the only religion you're allowed to be is the only religion you're not allowed to be is Christianity. Christianity is at a disadvantage in the courtroom, and that's a consequence of man-made law. You can't get away from it. Once you establish a legislature, it's only a matter of time until you start instituting injustice and taking away the freedom and justice of that we naturally enjoy under God's law. But let's play it out, okay? His scenario here, let's play it out. A billion people, right? I think he says 8 billion later, and then he says 4 billion at another time. He's throwing numbers around. Play it out, okay? We open up the borders, right? Or I should say, not open up the borders, because again, the term when you say open borders, what Christian nationalists mean is you know, no military presence. You know, you're not allowed to examine it. The borders are gone. And people can just walk in and take your stuff. That's what open borders means to them. Let's say we just had unregulated immigration, naturally regulated immigration, right? If we did that, he thinks 1 billion people are going to come here. And my question is, how in the world could you possibly come to that conclusion? These nations that these people are coming from are bad nations. And they're not bad nations because their government loves them. They're bad nations because their government hates them. There is no way that these nations, once they find out that they're going to lose a huge chunk of their population to America, they're going to make it illegal to leave. The problem is going to take care of itself. These nations, once they realize that all of their best and brightest workers, the people who have the get up and go, the industrious people, the entrepreneurs, they're getting up and they're moving to America to the tune of 1 billion people. Okay, that's his number, not mine. His number, to the tune of 1 billion people. They would immediately close their own borders and say, no one's allowed to leave. You're not allowed to leave. You're not allowed to do it. How do I know? First Kings 15. It's happened in the scriptures. And there was war between Asa and Baasha, king of Israel, all their days. Baasha, king of Israel, went up against Judah and built Ramah, that he might permit no one to go out or come in to Asa, king of Judah. Now, why would he do that? What's that all about? Why were people trying to get to Asa? Maybe because Asa was giving justice, and in his day, he had 10 years of rest. But we see what paganism does. Paganism is about creating prisons. Paganism doesn't like freedom or liberty. Paganism hates that. Paganism wants control and they want destruction. There is no way that these pagan nations, once they realized that their people were getting up and leaving in droves to come to this nation right now, there's no way they would allow that. Who are they going to control? Where are they going to get their tax money from? There's no way they would allow it. They would set up their own they would set up their own immigration system, and they would not allow anyone to immigrate. They wouldn't allow it. They'd shut down immigration out of the country. And you know what? The problem would take care of itself. If you play it out to the tune of 1 billion people suddenly show up on America's doorstep, the other nations would be like, hey, what's going on? We're losing all of our people. And they'd just like sit down and sit on their hands. Oh, I guess there goes all our people. I guess we're done. We're not needed anymore as a government. Go ahead. Bye-bye. Have a great time in America. You think that's what would happen? That's not what happened. Stop it. Come on. I don't know what kind of governments you think are over in these other nations. Like a bunch of idiots just sitting around twiddling their thumbs, looking for like some cat to pull out of a tree. There is no way that these other nations would allow their own people to come to America in droves. They don't mind it right now. It's just it's like this trickle, you know. There's this trickle, but India is already having problems with their best and brightest to come to America. They already have a problem with that. So if you were to allow naturally regulated immigration, biblical immigration in this country, these other nations would absolutely shut their borders down, and they would not allow anyone to leave.
That I've talked to would say, if 1 billion people profess Christ as Lord, are willing to take your job and fill out the paperwork, then you have to take 1 billion. In other words, their theonomy, the natural conclusion is their theonomy would destroy your children's future. It would end in the destruction, complete, irreversible destruction.
And so you see the fear mongering here, the existential threat. You know, if we follow God's law faithfully, we're going to lose our children. That's what he's saying. If we're faithful to Christ and his word, we're going to lose our children. He would never phrase it that way, but he kind of comes around and says it in a little bit here.
Of your country. America would no longer be America. It would be absolutely impoverished overnight. Your children would have no future. People would literally be hiding in caves, running into forest, and building, little dwellings with twigs.
I mean, this is Greta Thunberg level, how dare you? We have no future. I mean, this is right up there.
It's trying to survive 1 billion immigrants, and so my theology, call me crazy, it's like, well, Joel, do you have a chapter and verse? No, I have a brain.
Yeah. Okay. Let's let him continue with this reasoning here.
God gave me a brain. My God is a kind, merciful, logical, organized, ordered God. He gave me a brain. I know that that's stupid. And I will not be a theonomist if theonomy is just a euphemism for being retarded. So, am I a theonomist? I am a general equity or natural law theonomist. But I believe that reason is absolutely on the menu. Logic, nature, these things are absolutely on the menu. I believe that a Christian nation can, with every biblical justification, say, we will only take Christians. I like it. No welfare. You have to get a job. I like it. That's good. And a legal process that is strenuous and you must follow it. I like it. And they can also say, and given circumstance, given reason, given history, context, time, place,
and a little bit of central planning to boot.
America, since the Hart-Celler Act, has taken in 100 million, it's literally 70 million foreigners. Then look to second generation, their children, and third generation now. Over the last 60 years, it's about 150 million foreign peoples, first, second, and third generation in the last 60 years. I've looked it up. 150, approximately half the country, a little less than half, 40% of the country. We've done this, and just over half of a century, America has virtually no resemblance to its founding, to its heritage, and because of that, we will only take Christians. They have to work, don't get a free handout. They have to come through the legal means, and we will start doing that with a mitigated, reasonable number in the year of our Lord, 2100. Right? We'll start doing that 75 years from now. And I think that the Lord would smile on that position and say, well done. And the theonomists would say, no, propositional nationhood. If they learn in their broken English, I believe in the Father, God Almighty. If they do that, and they're willing to take your job for half the pay, and your capitalist companies sell you out.
Did you hear that? Is he a Marxist now? I mean, now I have to ask a question after that phrase. And your capitalist country sells you out? Your capitalist company sells you out? Are you guys becoming Marxist now? In the name of saving your nation? Are you guys embracing Marxism? That's not a vaguely Marxist thing he said. That's an openly Marxist thing he just said. And you're a capitalist? Oh my goodness. I mean, I listened to this before, and I guess I just paid attention just the one time that he brought up the jobs thing. But I guess I missed the, like, oh, you're a dumb capitalist. Well, you just say dumb, but you're a capitalist. Company sells you out. Oh my gosh. That is Marxism. That's not a Marxist talking point. That's Marxism. Is this where we're going to save the nation, guys? I know you guys are like, save the nation at all costs. Even if we have to, I don't know, nuke every state except Nebraska. To save America, we'll do everything it takes. I know that's the attitude. Like, I get it. Like, I've talked to you guys enough where you're like, yes, do everything you can to save America. And if we have to do evil, that government come, then it's just the way that it is. But I didn't know Marxism was on the menu here, to use this phraseology. That's news to me. I didn't know you guys would go that far. I would almost accept nukes before I accepted Marxism.
Pay of my pay, 100 times the pay they would get in their
right, but 100 times
coming
for them,
from.
And they will find somebody to help them. Use ChatGPT to fill out the legal papers. Then you have to take as many as want to come from any country, if they profess Christ, any country, any race, any culture, anything. You have to take them because there's not a verse in the Bible that says no. And I would say there is a verse in the Bible that says no. And the verse in the Bible that says no is the verse that speaks of anthropology, that God made us in his image and gave us a brain.
Well, I mean, where do you start with that one? There is a verse in the Bible, right? He says there is a verse in the Bible, and it's the verse in the Bible where God made us in his image and gave us a brain. He's wrong about that. His conclusion is wrong. You know how? I know that? Well, Luke, there's a chapter and verse in the Bible where it says where Joel Webbin is wrong about his ideas on immigration. Yes, there is a chapter and verse, and it's the anthropology where God made me in his image and gave me a brain. That's how I know he's wrong. This is fun. Why don't we all go around the table and we say something we disagree with? And then you conclude the reason you disagree with it is because you have a brain. That's fun. That's a fun game. Let's keep playing.
That's the verse. On a loud...
Oh my goodness. That one. Ooh. Oh man, that almost sounds like an atheist. I mean, respect to Joel here. I don't want to be disrespectful to him, but that's just really bad. That's horrible. I mean, that would get you kicked out of first grade Sunday school saying something like that. That wouldn't even pass a Bible quiz. This Bible quiz is wrong. Why? How do you know? God gave me a brain. I'm just going to, like, every time I disagree with him now, I'm just going to say, God gave me a brain. There's not much you can do for somebody who's walking around with theology like that, who's just like, I know the theonomists are wrong on their views on immigration, and what's the chapter and verse? The chapter and verse is anthropology, God gave me a brain. I don't want to be too disrespectful here, but I mean, I think his friends should have been like, Okay, come on, Joel. Stop it. Come on. I mean, to the law and the testimonies, right? I mean, we still got to follow that verse, right? I mean, so the theonomists are doing that, so, let's keep it respectful. He calls people who believe what, I and others believe, retarded. And he just said what he said. Now, I'm not going to call him retarded. But, we're in the ballpark. We are in the ballpark of retardation when we're saying things like, I don't need chapter and verse. And if I do need chapter and verse, yes, there is a verse. And it's because anthropology and because I have a brain. That sounds like an atheistic talking point there, kind of a thing. That sounds like something an atheist would say in a debate out of frustration that he was, not getting where he wanted to get with the Christian. But that is just horrible and terrible reasoning. And this is what happens, I think. Respectfully again to these guys, I think when people get to power, they usually, the ladder that they used to get to power is the first thing that they destroy, right? Trump used the Epstein thing to get to power, to get back. It wasn't the only thing he used, but that was one of the big ones. And now he's denying it, right? He's destroying that thing that led him to power. He turned his back on a lot of these Christian nationalists that voted for him, and the things that they wanted him to do. When the liberals came to power, the first thing they did was destroy the concept of tolerance, the very concept that led them into the good graces of the American people, ostensibly, right? Tolerance. Oh, we're tolerant. That was the thing. Oh, we just want to be nice. We want to be kind, right? The left used tolerance and love everyone and peace and acceptance, and we accept everyone for who they are. And that's like when they came to power, it's one of the first things they destroyed. Free speech, that used to be their talking point, but now that they're in power, they don't need that anymore because free speech will be the one thing to destroy them, so they can't allow it anymore, right? They can't allow it to be questioned. They can't be questioned. Reason's the same way for people who get into power. If you use reason to get into power, and you're like, I'm put me into power because I'm reasonable, like Webben here. I'm not saying he's asking people to put him into power, but the logic of it is that once you get into power, the first thing you're going to outlaw is reason. You destroy the thing that got you into power. The talking points, the people, the logic and the reasoning, your campaign slogan, because that's what people are going to expect of you. They're going to expect you to be reasonable. And as you can see, Webben, what he just said was unreasonable, a completely unreasonable thing that he just said. That was unreasonable. Yet he says you're supposed to be reasonable. So you can already see the traces of this. This is what happens with this is statism. This is statism. This is what statism does. It creates this ladder of power, and the first thing it does is when it gets to the top is that it destroys the ladder. And you can already see he's kind of already destroying the ladder that he's using to get, with which he's using to get into the good graces of these people. But that is a completely ridiculous and silly thing for him to say. What a horrible argument.
To use logic. So natural law.
And what he just said was completely illogical and unreasonable. And he said, and that's his whole thing. He just made an illogical and unreasonable statement. And his whole thing is he wants to be logical and reasonable.
Theonomy. I think that is where I'm at currently in my theonomic journey. And
theonomic. He put up quotes, theonomic. Oh, that's great, man.
And it's been frustrating because when I first came into theonomy, I was like, these are the guys. I love it. And then what I've seen, and I think many of you who watch the show have seen as well, over the last couple of years, the line between the theonomist and the propositional nationhood, constitution, even harder guy, the neocon, that line is virtually non-existent.
Neocon. Constitution even harder. I mean, I think it's good. I mean, for my two senses, the theonomists have moved away from the Constitution lately. Very few of them quote it. I mean, I know Rushdoony was a constitutional guy. He loved the Constitution. He also, I've heard him criticize it every now and then. But I don't know where he's getting the connection from to the neocons. was under the impression, and maybe he's more in tune with what the neocons than I am, but I was under the impression that the neocons were like anti-immigration people. That's what I was led to believe. I don't know. Maybe he's seeing something I'm not. I am a propositional nationhood person. I believe that an American is anyone who believes in the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness within a Christian context, understanding those rights within a Christian context. And when I say that, I've said this before again on this podcast, when I say that, what people pick up is, oh, you think everyone's an American, right? And so, and then I have to say it again. No, I believe anyone who's an American is anyone who believes in the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness within a Christian context. If they can articulate what it means, like the framers did, they wrote life, liberty, with Enlightenment principles aside, right? They're influenced very much negatively by the Enlightenment. But they were influenced negatively by the Enlightenment. But I think when they said right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that was within a Christian context. Even Locke, he was, from what I understand, he was raised by Puritans, and he grew up in a Puritan context. And so even when he was talking about life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, to some extent, even he understood it within the Christian context. What was so great about Puritan culture, you just couldn't escape the Puritan thought. Loved it. Or love it. And so I believe that an American is anyone who believes in the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I believe they might give a definition of an American. And I believe that propositionalism can make someone un-American. You understand what I'm saying? I believe if you are a Marxist, you're not an American, right? You could be here you could be 10th generation. You could come, have a relative from the Mayflower, and you love hot dogs and you love baseball, and you have your own business, and whatever it means for them to be an American, and he fits all those categories. But he's a Marxist. He's a communist. I would say you're not an American. No, you're disqualified now because you don't believe in the right to life and liberty, pursuit of happiness within a Christian context, right? And I believe a true American is anyone who believes in that within a Christian context. So I am a propositional nationhood kind of a person. And so when he brings up the problem of, the immigrants will come over here and they'll just lie and they'll say whatever they need to say to come in here, he's forgetting about one thing, theonomically speaking, that if they lie and they continue to practice idolatry, they will be killed for it, right? This is a promise from God that if you follow God's law in regards to this thing, that you will purge the wicked from among you. That's a promise from God. That if you properly punish idolatry and perversion and blasphemy, if you properly punish that, you will purge the wicked from among you. That includes the immigrants. The wicked immigrants will be purged. We see this again in the book of Kings when I think it is Asa, who is purging the land. It's the same word. You will purge the wicked from among you there in Deuteronomy 13. The same word is used by, I think it's King Asa, or is it Jehoshaphat? Then he purged the cult sodomites from the land. That's the same word. He purged them. And God said, you will purge the wicked from your land if you properly execute these people. And the same Hebrew word is used when, I think it was Asa, kicked out all the cult prostitutes, sodomites. He purged them, which means he was executing them correctly. The other ones got the message. They got out of Dodge. So once these immigrants come over here in a theonomic society, yes, they'll lie. Of course, they'll be liars, right? But again, in theonomic society, there is no test for immigration. You can just come over here and do commerce and live wherever you want. You can't become. You might not be able to become a civil magistrate. I think the law of God outlaws that. But you can live here, and you don't have to fill out any paperwork. You have to report yourself to the magistrate. That doesn't mean that the borders were open. Hey, relax. That doesn't mean the borders were open. Okay? That doesn't mean that, everyone just came and just lived wherever they want and then, they got welfare. That's not what God's system did. They still were able to maintain their borders. You can still have a border and have naturally regulated immigration. That, if you read the law of God, you figure out all the laws. Okay, how did this happen? It'll explain it to you if you care. But since God's law is regulated naturally through its own laws and doesn't need man-made law, what it does is when people are executed properly and publicly for actual sins and not made-up ones, then people get the message. So someone will come over here and they'll be like, okay, I'm going to take advantage of these people. I'm going to lie about who I am, and then I'm going to commit idolatry or what have you. I'm going to do something, and then I'm going to put them to the test and see if they'll let me do it. And once I get away with it, I'm going to call my buddies. They're going to come over here. We're going to have a great time. But God's law, again, always puts the righteous in a position of power perpetually. Since there's no legislature, there's no one to change that, right? God's law, the righteous are perpetually at an advantage in the courtroom. The righteous, right? Not the citizens, but the righteous. And someone's going to try and come over and test. They will be publicly executed. They'll be publicly stoned. And then the rest of the immigrants are going to be like, man, living in the trash back in Bombay sounds really good right about now, because these people are pretty serious about their laws. And I realize that I want to practice my Hinduism over here. That's going to put my life at risk. I'm not going over there. No, I'm not doing that. So, to play out his scenario, first, people would be killed if they were truly lying about their faith in Christ. They would be executed publicly. That's what God's law does. If you practice idolatry in a theonomic society. And secondly, if you did actually practice natural immigration, or naturally regulated immigration rather than unnaturally regulated immigration, if you did practice that, the nations would stop their own people from coming over here because too many people would come over here. The problem would take care of itself. Am I being unreasonable? Or are these guys somehow we know what's going to happen, and they're using all this fear mongering to, control, the way you view this? This is the woke right nonsense coming back. I'm going to end today's podcast right there. Thank you so much for listening. Hopefully I'll get a chance to look at the rest of this and respond to it. Don't want to be disrespectful to these guys. They did call me and my friends autistic and retarded, but we must not answer evil for evil. So looking forward to taking a gander at the rest of this podcast. So thank you so much, everyone, for listening. This is the Think and Reform podcast, and remember, my friends, think and reform.